I never imagined that love could turn into such a sophisticated prison. I always considered myself a strong woman, capable of facing adversities with a smile on my face. I graduated in business administration, building my career with absolute determination, overcoming obstacles that seemed insurmountable. I lost my parents at a young age and had to work early on to pay for my studies. Every penny saved, every hour of sleep lost studying for exams, every weekend sacrificed in poorly paid internships. All these forged in me a resilience that few understood. I dreamed of a future where professional fulfillment and personal happiness walked side by side, something that seemed almost utopian for a woman of simple origins like me. Then, as a twist of fate, I met Liam at a business conference. He was there representing his family's company. I was there as an assistant to one of the speakers. Our eyes met during the coffee break, and something inexplicable happened. Liam had kind eyes, a captivating smile, and a way of speaking that made me feel like the most important person in the world. Our conversations flowed as if we had known each other for years, not minutes. After 3 months of an intense courtship, he proposed to me under the stars at an exorbitantly priced restaurant that I could never afford with my salary. How could I resist such a display of affection? I was 32 years old when we got married, he 34. We held a simple ceremony, but filled with hope and shared dreams. Little did I know that I was only in the prologue of a story of humiliation that would consume years of my life and almost destroy my identity. The first time I noticed something strange was during the welcome dinner at my in-laws' house. The imposing mansion on the outskirts of the city already caused me initial discomfort. As Liam parked his imported car in the circular driveway, flanked by impeccably maintained gardens, I felt a knot in my stomach that I attributed to nervousness. "They're going to love you," Liam assured, squeezing my hand as if he could transfer his confidence to me through that touch. The uniformed maid who greeted us at the door gave me a curious look, as if trying to decipher what kind of woman had captured the son of her employers. I was led down a corridor decorated with family portraits and artworks that certainly cost more than the entire apartment where I grew up. The dining room looked like it came out of a decor magazine, with a solid wood table that easily accommodated 12 people, crystal chandeliers and gleaming silverware. Mrs. Eleanor, the matriarch of the family, was standing by the fireplace when we entered. Tall, elegant, with perfectly dyed hair and a posture that revealed years of etiquette lessons, she looked me up and down, as one would evaluate a new piece of furniture of questionable quality. Her cold eyes scanned my dress, the best one I had, bought especially for the occasion, and seemed to catalog every imperfection, every detail that revealed my less privileged origin. "So, this is the businesswoman?" she asked, with a condescending air that made my stomach churn. The way she pronounced businesswoman sounded as if she were saying cleaner or something equally depreciative in her distorted value system. In that moment, I swallowed dry and smiled, gripping the strap of my purse tightly, while Liam, beside me, seemed not to notice the poison distilled in her words. I attributed her behavior to the natural nervousness of meeting a daughter-in-law, the maternal concern to ensure that her son had made a good choice. How naive of me. What terrible and painful naivety. Visits to the in-laws' house became a weekly humiliation ritual. Every Sunday, I was welcomed not as part of the family, but as an intruder who needed to prove her worth. "Anna dear, could you serve lunch while we talk?" Mrs. Eleanor would say with that plastified smile that didn't reach her eyes. And there, I would go, to the kitchen, while everyone settled in the living room, laughing and sharing family stories that I would never be a part of. Ryan and Mary, Liam's siblings, were masters at making venomous comments disguised as innocent jokes. "Wow, Anna, you're gaining weight, huh? Marriage does that to some women," Mary would snap, adjusting her designer blouse that cost more than my monthly salary. Ryan, on the other hand, loved questioning my professional competencies. "Business administration? Interesting. But in the end, you ended up being more useful managing the house, didn't you?" And he would laugh. And Liam just watched, sometimes with a yellow smile, sometimes with a complicit silence that hurt more than 1,000 words. When our first child was born, I thought everything would change. After all, I was the mother of Mrs. Eleanor's grandson, but reality proved even more cruel. "Anna, don't you think you're breastfeeding too much? In my time, we used bottles and babies grew strong. Anna, that cry is hunger. Can't you interpret your child's needs?" And so the comments continued, undermining my confidence as a mother, making me question every decision. "And Liam?" Liam continued in his comfort bubble, avoiding any conflict. "My mother just wants to help Anna. She raised 3 children. She knows what she's talking about." I wanted to scream, wanted to say that every baby is unique, that I was the mother and knew what my child needed, but the words died in my throat, suffocated by the fear of seeming like the neurotic and out-of-control wife. As the years passed, I became an expert at swallowing words and tears. I learned to smile when I wanted to cry, to thank when I wanted, to protest. My skin became armor against disapproving looks and sharp words, but inside, something was slowly dying. My essence, my will, my dreams. The breaking point came during an apparently ordinary dinner. It was Liam's birthday, and I had spent the entire day preparing his favorite meal. I woke up at 5 in the morning to get the freshest shrimp at the local market. I spent hours researching the perfect recipe, the one that would match the childhood memories he valued so much. I made 3 attempts at risotto until I achieved that creamy consistency he loved, neither too soft nor too al dente. The aroma of the homemade vegetable broth filled our home like a comforting hug. For dessert, I chose imported dark chocolate, his favorite, working meticulously on the perfect melting point, adding a touch of cognac that I knew he would appreciate. I arranged everything in elegant glasses we had bought on our honeymoon in Venice, the only international trip we had taken together, before the children and responsibilities anchored us to a predictable routine. I remember how Liam insisted on buying those expensive glasses, saying they would always remind us of those perfect days. What irony that now they would serve as the backdrop for the collapse of the illusion we called marriage. The table was set with meticulous care, every detail thought out to celebrate the man who, despite everything, I still loved. Candles strategically placed to create a romantic atmosphere, the best linen tablecloths and napkins, a flower arrangement that matched the room's decor. I even played the song that played on our first date, hoping to spark some of that man I fell in love with. All this while trying to ignore the dark circles under my eyes and the weight of exhaustion on my shoulders. Everyone arrived. The usual comments were made about my appearance, about the tidiness of the house, about how I should have hired a caterer so I wouldn't be so tired. I thanked with the automatic smile I had perfected over the years. When I served the risotto, the initial silence gave me hope. Maybe finally, my effort would be recognized. "Well, but it doesn't compare to the risotto my mom made at birthday parties," Liam said, with that childlike nostalgia in his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor smiled triumphantly. "The secret is in the broth. Dear, Anna hasn't mastered the technique yet. Maybe one day." Something inside me broke at that moment. It wasn't just the comment, but the satisfaction in her eyes, Liam's acquiescence, the veiled laughter of his siblings. It was as if all my effort, all my love, all my dedication were absolutely worthless compared to Mrs. Eleanor's glorified memories. That night, after everyone had left, and Liam had fallen asleep with the irritating calm of someone who didn't perceive the emotional earthquake beside him, I spent hours staring at the ceiling of the bedroom. The house's silence amplified every thought, every painful memory, every moment of humiliation I had swallowed in recent years. The faint light entering through the window cast strange shadows on the walls, as if they were physical manifestations of my inner demons. I thought about all the times I diminished myself to fit into the spaces designated for me. I thought about the nights I cried silently in the bathroom so that no one would notice my pain. I thought about the forced smiles, the invented excuses, the energy wasted trying to please people who would never accept me as part of their precious family. Tears silently streamed down my face, wetting the pillow like so many other nights. But there was something different in them, something I didn't recognize immediately, as it had become a strange feeling to me. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of defeat, self-deprecation, or despair. They were tears of anger, a pure, crystal-clear anger, almost liberating. A cold and calculated anger that began to crystallize an unshakable resolution in my chest. I would no longer be the sacrificial victim in that family. I would no longer be the footnote in the grand story of the Smiths. I would no longer allow my children to grow up seeing their mother treated as a servant, less than human. The submissive Anna, willing to do anything to be accepted, died that night, and from her ashes, a new woman was about to be born. The next morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't experienced in years. While Liam was still sleeping, I discreetly got out of bed and went to the nearest shopping mall. I bought a small notebook, a hardcover one, and discreet, that would easily fit in my purse without arousing curiosity. I chose one with a lock, a small luxury that would ensure my most intimate thoughts remained protected from prying eyes. I also bought a good quality pen. If I was going to document my liberation, it would be with an instrument worthy of the task. Back home, while preparing the breakfast that Liam expected promptly at 7:30 a.m., I began mentally structuring my plan. It would not be an uncontrolled emotional outburst, nor a dramatic escape like in the movies. It would be something calculated, methodical, executed with the surgical precision I learned during my business administration training. The irony didn't escape me. I would use the organizational skills they so despised against themselves. That very day, I started my record. In the notebook, I began documenting every comment, every situation, every moment of humiliation. Exact dates, precise times, people present, exact words spoken ipsis literis. I noted the context, body language, reactions, or lack thereof, from Liam. Nothing escaped my new clinical gaze on that sick family dynamic. I was creating, without realizing it, a meticulous dossier of my own degradation, an irrefutable proof that I wasn't exaggerating or being too sensitive, as Liam frequently suggested. Simultaneously, I began obsessively researching abusive relationships, dedicating the hours I spent alone to educate myself. I devoured academic articles on emotional manipulation, watched online lectures on gaslighting, participated anonymously in forums where other women shared stories strikingly similar to mine. I learned about toxic family dynamics, about generational abuse patterns, about the role of facilitators like Liam. The more I read, the more clearly I saw the patterns repeating in my life, like a terrible blueprint that had unconsciously guided every interaction in my husband's family. I also decided to invest in myself. I started exercising again, not to lose weight and satisfy the aesthetic standards imposed by Mary, but to feel my body strong, alive, capable. I reconnected with old college friends, women who had pursued their careers and could guide me about the current job market. I began exploring the idea of starting my own business, something I had always dreamed of, but had been buried under family responsibilities and others' expectations. Liam noticed the changes, of course. How could he not? The man who had lived with me for years couldn't fail to notice the metamorphosis happening under his own roof. It wasn't just my more upright physical posture, or the more direct and sustained gaze. It was something deeper, a change in the energy I emanated, the way I occupied spaces that previously I just asked permission to exist in. I no longer swallowed insults with a submissive smile. I responded, always politely, for I would never lower myself to their level, but responded with a firmness that caused visible discomfort. When Mrs. Eleanor, during a Sunday lunch, suggested in her falsely concerned tone that I should change, "What's going on with you?" Liam asked one night, after I had confronted Ryan about a sexist comment he made about women in the workplace. "I'm rediscovering myself," I replied simply, and it was true. Each small resistance, each small assertion of my identity was a piece of me coming back to life. 6 months after the birthday dinner, I was unrecognizable. Not just physically, leaner with a new haircut, but internally. The cornered woman had given way to someone who remembered her own worth, and my dossier was complete. Pages upon pages of evidence of the treatment I had received over the years. There was also something else, recordings. Small audio clips captured at strategic moments when I knew the comments would arise. It wasn't illegal in the state where we lived, I checked beforehand. It was just my guarantee, my concrete proof that I wasn't exaggerating or imagining things, as Liam frequently suggested. The perfect opportunity for my, let's say, presentation came with the announcement of a special dinner at the in-laws' house. Mrs. Eleanor made it a point to gather everyone to announce that she and her husband would be taking a 6-month trip through Europe, a lifetime achievement. Everyone had to be present, without exceptions. I carefully prepared for that night. I chose a black dress, elegant but discreet, light makeup, just enough to highlight my eyes, now livelier and more determined. I dressed up our children carefully, making sure they were comfortable and beautiful. And in my purse, besides the dossier and the phone with the recordings, there was something else, a folder with documents regarding the business I was about to open, my declaration of independence. We arrived at the in-laws' mansion punctually at 8, as requested. Mrs. Eleanor greeted us with her usual artificial smile. "Anna, dear, you're different," she commented, eyes assessing my appearance as she always did, but without the usual venom. "I'm feeling different too, Mrs. Eleanor. It's amazing how some internal changes reflect externally, don't you think?" I replied with a serene smile that momentarily left her speechless. The dinner proceeded as usual. Exaggerated compliments to Mrs. Eleanor's cooking, comments on how everything was perfect, old stories that excluded any participation of mine in the family history. I let everything happen, observing with an almost clinical distance the dynamics that once deeply hurt me. When it was time for toasts, to celebrate the upcoming trip, Mrs. Eleanor made sure to thank everyone for being there, emphasizing the importance of having the family gathered at this special moment. It was then that I asked for the floor. "I'd also like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. All eyes turned to me, surprised. I rarely took the initiative at family gatherings. I'd like to toast to appearances. The silence that followed was absolute. To the appearances we maintain, to the smiles we force, to the sweet words that hide poison, to the perfect family that exists only in Christmas photos and social media posts. Liam looked at me, alarmed. "Anna, what are you doing?" he whispered, tense. "I'm toasting to the truth, dear. Something rare in this room," I replied, without changing my calm and controlled tone. Then, I took out my dossier from my purse. "You know, in the last 6 months, I've been collecting moments, small snippets of our family life that may have gone unnoticed by you all, but that have stayed with me." I began to read. Dates, situations, exact words. Mrs. Eleanor's face went from shock to indignation, while Ryan and Mary exchanged nervous looks. Liam seemed petrified, as if he was seeing a stranger. "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Eleanor finally interrupted. "You recorded private conversations like some kind of spy. This is absurd. An invasion." "Invasion?" I repeated with an ironic smile. "Like the comments about my weight at family meetings? Like the criticisms of how I raise my children? Like the constant questioning of my professional and domestic abilities? Those weren't private conversations, Mrs. Eleanor. They were public humiliations." I took my phone out of my purse. But if written words aren't enough, perhaps spoken words are more convincing. I played the audio of a conversation between Mrs. Eleanor, Ryan, and Mary, captured during a previous family gathering while I was in the kitchen preparing coffee. "I don't know what Liam saw in her, honestly," said Mrs. Eleanor's unmistakable voice. "A woman without class, without refinement. And look how she gained weight after the children. Liam deserved someone of our level." Liam's face transformed as the audio continued, revealing increasingly cruel comments, not just about me, but about our children, our choices as a couple. When I finally silenced my phone, the room was in shock. That was taken out of context. Ryan, the family's lawyer, always ready to defend, tried. "You can't judge a years-long relationship by a few moments of frustration." "A few moments?" I questioned, flipping through my dossier. "I have here records of 3 years of moments. 3 years of being treated like a servant in this house. 3 years of smiling while being belittled, criticized, and isolated. 3 years of waiting for my husband to defend me in vain." I looked directly at Liam, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. "Do you know why I'm doing this today? It's not for revenge, although I admit there's a certain satisfaction in finally telling the truth. I'm doing this because I deserve respect. Our children deserve to grow up seeing their mother treated with dignity, and because I'm tired of being the scapegoat for this family's frustrations." I then took out the folder of documents. This week, I signed the lease for the space where I'm going to open my consulting business, something I always dreamed of doing, but delayed because I was convinced that my place was only at home, serving and pleasing. Not anymore. The reaction was immediate. Mrs. Eleanor stood up, outraged. "Liam, are you going to allow this? Your wife insulting us, recording private conversations, opening a business without consulting the family?" I looked at my husband, curious about his response. He was pale, his eyes alternating between me and his mother, as if faced with an impossible choice. "Mom," he finally said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk about how Anna has been treated in this family." It was as if a lightning bolt had struck the room. Mrs. Eleanor, for the first time since I knew her, was at a loss for words. Ryan and Mary seemed uncomfortable, looking at their plates as if looking for a way out of the situation. "Liam," Mrs. Eleanor continued, trying to regain control, "you can't be serious. Your wife comes here, makes absurd accusations, plays clearly edited recordings and you... Enough, Mom, Liam interrupted, with a firmness he had never shown before. I heard the recordings. I recognize the voices. I recognize the words. And the worst part is that I recognize the situations Anna described. I was there. I saw. And I stayed silent because it was easier. Because I was raised that way. Because his voice faltered. And for the first time that night, I saw tears in his eyes. Because I'm a coward who was afraid to defend my own wife. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with all the unspoken words over the years. Mrs. Eleanor seemed to have shrunk in her chair, as if her son's confrontation had stripped her of that aura of unquestionable authority. I think we should leave, she finally said, adjusting her purse as if this closed the matter. Clearly, tonight is not conducive for celebrations. I agree, I calmly replied. But before you leave, I'd like to make something clear. I will never be treated as inferior in this family again. I will never allow comments about my body, my ability as a mother, or my professional competence. I will never again be relegated to the kitchen while important conversations happen in the living room. And I will never, ever tolerate my children being judged by your distorted standards of what a family is. I stood up, indicating our part in the meeting was over. Liam stood with me, still looking stunned, but for the first time, clearly by my side. Your trip will be great, I'm sure, I added with a serene smile. And when you return, maybe we can start a new phase. A phase where we all treat each other with the respect we deserve. We left there heads held high, me and Liam side by side, our children between us. In the car, silence extended for a few minutes, both of us processing the emotional earthquake we had just experienced. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Liam finally asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Why did you wait so long? I looked out the window, watching the city lights pass by like luminous blurs. Because I hoped you would realize on your own. Because I didn't want to be the problematic wife who drives her husband away from the family. Because I was afraid that if forced to choose, you wouldn't choose me. He abruptly parked the car on the shoulder, turning to face me. There was an intensity in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Anna, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every moment I failed you. For every time I allowed my family to belittle you. For every complicit silence. Tears streamed down his face now. A 39-year-old man finally confronting a lifetime of family conditioning. I choose you, Anna. I always should have chosen you. I reached out, touching his face with a tenderness I hadn't felt in a long time. It's not about choosing between your family and me, Liam. That was never what I wanted. It's about respect, dignity, building together a family where everyone is valued. That night marked the beginning of a profound transformation in our lives. In the following weeks, Liam began visiting his parents alone, having long conversations that, according to him, should have happened decades ago. Ryan and Mary called separately to apologize. The words sounded rehearsed, insincere, but it was a start. My business began to operate, small at first, but with promising projects. Liam became my biggest supporter, proudly sharing my successes with colleagues and friends. At home, the dynamic changed completely. We shared responsibilities, decisions, dreams. Our children witnessed a marriage of partnership and mutual respect, no longer the silent submission I had modeled for so long. 6 months passed, and Mrs. Eleanor and her husband returned from Europe. The reunion was tense, as we expected, but there was something different in the air, a reluctant respect perhaps, or the recognition that the old dynamics would no longer work. Well, Anna, Mrs. Eleanor commented, assessing my appearance, as she always did, but without the usual venom. I'm great, thank you, I replied sincerely. The consulting business is growing, the boys are happy at their new school, and Liam and I are rediscovering our marriage. A slight blush colored the matriarch's face, as if my words brought to light the entire situation we had experienced before her departure. Liam mentioned your business. It sounds interesting. It wasn't a warm compliment, but coming from Mrs. Eleanor, it was almost a declaration of surrender. The dinner proceeded in a fragile balance, everyone testing the new limits, the new unwritten rules. When it was time to serve dessert, I instinctively stood up, years of conditioning moving my body before my mind could process. Let me help, Mom, Liam said, standing up as well. Mrs. Eleanor's look was pure shock, as if her son had announced he was going to Mars the next morning. In that small gesture was all the change we had fought for. Liam wasn't just helping me, he was sending a clear message. In this family, no one serves alone. As we left hours later, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. There were no winners and losers. There were only people learning, painfully, to respect each other mutually. "Are you okay?" Liam asked as we drove home. In the back seat, our children slept, exhausted. After the night of forced socialization, I looked at him, at the man I had almost lost to the shadows of his own making, and smiled. I'm at peace, not because everything is perfect, but because I'm finally living authentically. He reached out, intertwining his fingers with mine. "Thank you for not giving up on us." And there, in that car, with our children sleeping behind us and the city quiet around us, I felt that I had gained something much more valuable than revenge. I had regained my dignity, my marriage, and most importantly, I had regained myself. The journey wasn't easy, nor free of pain. There were many tears, many difficult conversations, many moments of almost giving up. But every time I look at my children now, I see them growing up in an environment where respect is the foundation of everything. I see my daughter watching, a mother who doesn't bow before depreciative comments, who defends her space with firmness and dignity. I see my son learning that being a man doesn't mean silencing the women around him, but uplifting them, respecting them as equals. And when I look at Liam, I see a man who had the courage to break with toxic generational patterns, who chose to grow and evolve, even when it would have been easier to settle into the familiar, the known. As for me, that woman who silenced her pain with fake smiles seems like a stranger now. I recognize her in old photographs, in the empty eyes that smiled without true joy, but she no longer exists. In her place is someone who knows her worth, who doesn't negotiate her dignity, who understands that genuine love can only flourish on the soil of mutual respect. The revenge I planned ended up being a liberation, not just for me, but for our entire family. Because in the end, the greatest revenge against those who try to diminish you is to live fully, authentically, without fear of shining with your own light. And that's what I do now, every day. I shine.